Welcome to Transform Your Relationships Live. I'm Laura Rubinstein here with the awesome and amazing Dr. Rhoberta Shaler. Hi, Rhoberta.
Hello, Laura. And here we are again talking about deep, deep stuff, how past trauma affects our current relationships. In our last broadcast, we talked about things that are really important, as we always do. And now we're moving on to connect some of those dots.
Yeah, in fact, last time we talked about how you experience trauma. Like, can you identify it? Maybe you don't even realize you're operating out of it. And now that we have some more awareness, we want to talk about how specifically in relationships it's affecting people, because trauma does affect people in relationships. We can't deny it, right?
Oh, yes. And we can be totally unaware of it. We're not even at the point of awareness in order to deny it, but we can be unaware of it. And that's what we're endeavoring to bring last time and this time is maybe you don't even realize what's going on. I'll give you an example. I was working with a client yesterday and a couple, and they've been having the same kind of go round over and over and over. And when we finally dissected it, I said to her, who in your family behaved like that towards you? And what does it trigger? And the same with him. And there was this amazing cathartic moment when they both realized that she was treating him as though he were responding to him as though he were a father, and he was responding to her as though she were his mother. And the trauma that they had when they were children had gone completely unaware in each of their cases. So when we started to work with that, we could heal it. And that's really what we're talking about today.
And trauma could look like just the abuse patterns or, verbal patterns of that really are shocking to the system and demeaning, and that puts us in a state, right? Where do we go when we are like so hit with this? Our emotions are so fried in a way, or we're feeling like we have to have a coping mechanism.
Yeah. Well, we don't really realize that we're operating on a level of anxiety. And sometimes that underlying anxiety is untapped. We just think that's normal. So if we think of a scale of 1 to 10, let's just take noise, sound, right? Um, in 1900, when there was a fire, we had a horse and a little bell on top of it, and someone rang the bell and everybody heard it because everything in the world was less noisy. It was quieter. Now we have multi sirens with multi frequency sounds plus a whole lot of light patterns, and still people are on their phones with their earbuds in and they don't know there's a fire. But the thing with that is that if you were standing on the street corner, the difference between hearing the horse with the little bell and hearing the current fire engine automatically puts us in distress. Just that amount of sound puts us in distress. So think if we have a past trauma, think if we have accrued trauma in the current relationship, we have resentment, frustration, and then you open your mouth and you respond. Then you don't even realize how much maybe you're at a 4 already. You're just sitting on the edge of explosion much of the time. That's really something to look at. Like, where did I get to this point from?
Yeah. And so when we're like operating this way, I know you talk about there's this thing about perfection that comes into play. What happens?
Well, there's lots of information about this, that perfection paralysis, that in order to please a parent who won't be pleased, sort of like the Red Queen in Alice in Wonderland, no matter what, just off with their heads, right? And we try to be more and more perfect as we're a child so that people will, like us and take care of us and help us to survive. So we get into a paralysis of perfection. But that doesn't serve us, because that means that we as adults are jumping to someone's tune that isn't us, and we have to make a transfer there. If our perfectionism is to please somebody that we needed to survive, we don't need them to survive anymore. So we need to look at, where did that perfectionism come from? And also to recognize in our own awareness that perfection is impossible. And then if you happen to be with a hijackal or another toxic person in a relationship, you can be perfect to what they said they wanted, and as soon as you do it perfectly to what they said, they want something different.
Right. They change their mind.
Move the markers.
And the whole thing about being a perfectionist is you're talking about in any area of your life, or just in how you relate to someone?
Well, in most areas of your life, I remember when I used to own a big yoga and health retreat center, and I remember somebody coming and they had brought their needlepoint. And they had the most beautiful piece of needlepoint already done. They were sitting quietly in the sun doing needlepoint. And I went over and I was appreciating the piece. And the woman said, "I have to take it all out." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, look at the back. It's not perfect." Right? So she internalized the perfection, that what if somebody turned over and looked at the back, and there were knots and gaps and threads that crossed one another. Now, I relate to that because when I was much younger, and still occasionally it happens, that I realize that I have an unrealistic concern when I'm doing something that comes from, what's my mother going to say? Like
You
my
have your
mother.
mom talking to you in your head, right?
Well, everybody does,
Uh-huh.
whomever that was that bothered them. And, it doesn't happen very often, but I understand the dynamic, that no matter what, she was going to find fault with it, no matter what, right? So this woman, I said to her, "Who was it who would turn over your needlepoint and find fault with it?" And she said, "Oh, my mother." And the way she said it, and I said, "Well, your mother's not here.
Mm.
And the front of it is absolutely beautiful,
Mm.
and you're going to put it on top of something where no one will ever see the back. So let's work on that, right? That this has beauty, and you've accomplished something and you've created something, and you are focused on whether or not some obscure, weird person rips open the cushion and eventually looks at the back of the needlepoint. And we live like that sometimes. Like, what if somebody looks? What if somebody wonders? What if, and it gets deeply ingrained. I still have moments like that. I know what to do with them, but I still have those moments because I was so severely emotionally abused. And when you have a parent who constantly finds fault with you, you cannot get it right no matter how wonderful you are. You just can't get it right. I mean, I had two hijackal parents. I was fortunately to get them off my back. I was very musically talented, so I went and played in all kinds of competitions and sang and won things. They never came. They just took the clippings out of the newspaper. But I had a redeeming feature that made them look good. But at home, I couldn't do anything right. So if you have those kinds of patterns, you may have these underlying things that you're operating from that you think are, just who you are, but they're not. They're things that you adopted and adapted or inherited in order to keep the giants in your life happy, those big people who brought you home from the hospital. And that transfers over into your current relationships and your fears about that. So past trauma affects your relationship, whether you are aware of the past trauma or you give it any credence or not.
And I think that's where, I think we talked about this last time, we've talked about it before, but sitting in some quiet time and really reflecting and asking, whose criticism is this?
Yeah.
Or is this criticism accurate? Like, it doesn't even matter whose it is. Maybe you've adopted it, become your own. I can relate to that. And I remember somebody telling me, put the whips and chains on yourself away. It's okay. Like,
Yeah.
I needed actually kind of a parental figure to say that to me in a way. And I
Permit.
need to be parent myself in that way and say, that is not the truth. I don't know why I have this thinking pattern of so critical, so hard on myself, so perfection. What am I? And then you started talking about fear. So there's a lot of fear of not being perfect in someone's eyes, and what does that mean that they said it meant about you, right?
Yes, and not only does it affect your self-esteem, but the question is, how do I get love? Do I have to be perfect in order to get love? Well, those people are never going to fully love you. They can say the words, but their behavior is
Mhm.
screaming, I don't. So it's really important to make those distinctions when you get older. Absolutely, that this fear, this paralysis of perfection is something that you just have to say to. Like, who am I doing this for? When Charles and I wrote Soul Solitude, taking time for our souls to catch up, we talked about two really big dilemmas in there, among many that we could have. But one of them is the addiction to drama, and the other is living up to the expectations of others.
Mm.
And if we are living up to the expectations of others as an adult all the time, that's a child thing that we have adopted and brought forward. Surely we live up to the expectations of a boss or something, but that's not what inherently happened to us in our first 20 years of life. So it becomes very important that we don't get paralyzed by perfectionism. But personally, Laura, I've been working on this for a while now, that I think that it's not so much perfection paralysis. Perfectionism sounds like everything you and I have just spoken about, but I think deeply underneath that, what's pushing that is a fear of rejection.
And I was thinking a fear of being lovable.
We're
Like,
not lovable.
yeah, I'm not lovable. I'm
Mhm.
afraid I'm not lovable, right? Am I fear, so I'm going to be rejected because underneath it all, everything I've been told my life is this messaging of like, you're not worthy, you're not lovable.
We're
You
good
need
enough.
or good enough. Yeah.
Mhm.
So there's this underlying question that I think many people will discover if they sit and they say, "Oh my gosh, why do I feel like I need to be this way, so perfect? Why am I so critical on myself? Because that's the only way. If I meet this expectation, I am lovable. If I meet it."
Right, exactly. So there are a lot of underlying things to look at. And this may be your breakthrough day listening to this, that,
Mhm.
whoa, yeah, this all happened to me when I was young and I'm still doing it. And the good news is that you can get help to heal. And it's really important to do that because you don't want this in your repertoire for another minute once you realize what it is.
Yeah,
But that fear of rejection is really strong. Right, like, you can take that into a relationship, as we're talking about how the trauma affects our current relationships. You can take that in unwittingly, unaware, and then you are just sitting there all the time like, "Do you still like me? Do you still like me? You're gonna push me away?" And you live from that fear, so you become a person that they get tired of having to assure you all the time, and it may be a self-fulfilling prophecy that after a while they say, "Okay. All right, apparently this is never gonna work out because you were always fearful that I'm leaving you, and I'm tired of this,
yeah.
so I'm leaving you," right?
And this inner critic in us, like, is just nonstop.
Working overtime for
Yeah.
sure. That inner critic, that inner courtroom is always on the job 24/7. Am I good enough? What are they thinking? What do I need to do? Am I going to be able to do it? Will I do it in time? Will I do it well enough? Oh, I'm never good at that. I never succeed. No matter what I do, I can't meet that expectation. That whole script that's running in your head was acquired for the most part in your first 20 years of life. Are you going to let it run for the rest and run you for the rest of your life? Because those traumas that happen there need to be healed so that you have the bandwidth to enjoy what you create going forward. But if your bandwidth is being taken up by the fears of your first 20 years of life, you don't have that available to you.
And it's running the show, and if you're not aware of it, it will keep running the show,
Yeah.
right? And it will affect everything you do in relationship because you're going to look for it, right? It's that cognitive dissonance. You look for that, like where you're going to get rejected, where somebody's not going to love you. I know people who haven't been able to get into a relationship because they keep running some sort of a script that's like, well, I'm too picky, or they're not good enough, or I need this, or there's always this inner critic dialoguing with them about.
More an inner critic of themselves than other people. Like, nobody will like me. I'm not good enough for that person. I'm not going to risk rejection. I am not going to take that opportunity, because what if after a while
What if?
that person finds out that I'm not who they think I am? And that would be awful. So we're actually doing what I call in my work dancing for two. We're doing our work, and we're having conversation about ourselves, and we're having a conversation with and about the other person, and then we make assumptions about the relationship, and then we act on those assumptions, and we've never had that conversation with the other human.
We may not even have been in with another human. I know somebody who keeps saying to herself, I don't like living with another person. I'm not good company. What if they my style, they'll cramp my style, but they desperately want a relationship at the same time. So there's a lot of sabotaging that goes on
Yeah.
because of that inner critic dialogue and the dancing for two. Like, we won't be able to work it out. They'll be hard to deal with. Blah, 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 I won't.
Yeah, and we do that when we're in a relationship too. The
Right.
dancing for two is, "Oh, well, they won't wanna do that. I'm not even gonna ask them if they'd like. I really want them to do it, but, oh, I'm not gonna risk the fear of rejection that they won't wanna do it, so I'm just going to know I know them well enough, they won't wanna do it." Now we don't get to do it at all, and we don't know if we could, right? So we're running those things, as you say, and when they're running in the background all the time, you don't have the bandwidth to be present and find out what's really happening here. So you're missing out on wonderful things that you could have, all because you're running the inner critic and courtroom in your head. You know? And
It's
you
a
don't
lot of
have to do that.
self-torture, actually, it feels like.
Well, it is. I mean, somebody beat you up and you just keep hitting yourself anyway. Like, you need to give that person back their stick and stop doing it to yourself. And I don't mean to make that sound simplistic or blaming. It is an option for you to say, I'm still carrying around the fact that, my mother did all of these things, and now I'm expecting that to happen in the world. And my mother passed years ago, and yet she's living on in my head. Is that
Right here.
okay? Yeah, is that okay? No, it's not okay, right? And, I laugh when it comes up now because it'll just be a funny moment, or something will pass my head, "Oh, yeah, thanks, mom." You know?
Thanks, no
No.
thanks.
Yeah, we don't operate from that script anymore, but thanks for showing up, right? But if you don't do the work, you don't get to that place, and
And if you're in relationship and you're doing this dancing for two, you don't really connect with your partner.
no, because 'cause you're
You're
doing it
very
all in your
insecure.
head.
Yeah, you're very insecure. You're always afraid of, you're holding on so tight that it's like choking in a
Yeah,
way,
yeah.
and annoying, and you may not even realize it. So, I know you have a term for that. Is that the insecure attachment?
Yeah, that's not my term, it's a research, but, we have talked about attachment theory a few times, and if we didn't have parents to whom we felt secure with, I mean, we there are two main areas. We have secure attachment and insecure attachment that didn't connect, didn't bond with us, didn't take us at face value, didn't welcome us with joy, as my colleague Gary Salyer says. If we didn't have someone approving of us, as someone who loved us and accepted us, then we can form an insecure attachment. So we're always like, oh, I don't know if I'm safe. I don't know if I'm safe. Secure attachment is I know I'm safe. Insecure attachment is I don't know that I'm safe. So therefore, I'm going to walk on eggshells and be in anxiety. And in that situation, then there are different forms that it shows up in. And one of those forms is what we call dismissive attachment, meaning I don't need anybody. I prefer to do things entirely myself. I'm not asking for help. I won't ask for help. That's the fear of rejection, right?
Mm.
So these things show up. We're insecurely attached. We can be dismissive or we can be avoidant. Like I'm not even going to try because I know it's going to go south. And nobody likes me. I'm not going to risk that. It's too hard. All of these things, if they're your inner dialogue and you're listening to this, no, you can change that. You don't have to live from that. You can choose differently. Yes, it'll always natter its negativity in the background every now and again, like my mom. But you are then in charge. You take charge of that conversation in your head. And wow, imagine all the energy that you would free up. So it's worth it.
Yeah, getting up to date with our past traumas really brings that awareness and that ability to deal with it so you can be fully in a relationship and know what's the trauma response and what's really going on in the relationship, right?
Yes, yes. And is it actually based in my fear that I accrued from the past? Or am I actually seeing this human who happens to be a friend of me as who they are in the moment? I spend a lot of time, Laura, saying to people when I'm working with couples, whose face do you have on your partner right now? Is it some boyfriend from the past, a parent, an abuser?
Mm.
Or are you actually seeing this person in real time and thinking about how they treat you, not how you're afraid you've been treated in the past and they might treat you? So you have to come into the present moment. And that's where you free up the energy because now
Mm.
you're not dragging around that emotional Santa Claus bag full of stuff, right?
All those goodies from the past that are just weighing you down, right?
Yeah.
Emotionally. And so becoming aware of the trauma is a great place to start. And what is the possibility when you start doing that?
Well, the joy is, of course, you free up your energy. Also, you identify where you got it. Then we go back to something you and I have talked about that happened when after my mother passed, when I made this realization. I didn't like my mother, didn't like what she stood for, didn't like how she behaved, didn't like anything about my mother. And yet there was a part of me that was still waiting for her approval. And so it's very important then to be able to let go when you do this work. Let go of the fact of waiting for the approval of someone of whom you don't approve, because those are the parents that treated you poorly or some relative or authority figure that treated you poorly. And you are still jumping to their tune as opposed to creating your own.
And this is ingrained. So it's easy to say, let it go, but it's not necessarily easy
Right.
in practice. It takes time.
Yeah.
It may take time. It just takes awareness. It takes guidance. Um, and what else would you advise to really be able to let go of that trauma?
Well, that's why it's important to get help, because you've got to be the one who's processing, and someone directing that process for you makes it so you can stay in the process. And that's why getting help is important. If you're not going to get help, it will still do you so much good to realize these things, to come into awareness. Like, I am dragging around my mother's expectations into looking into everybody else's eyes, and that's not worthy of who I am right now. I don't need to do that. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to do something differently. Every tiny little thing that you do that changes that is positive. So whether you get help or not, keep moving in that direction. Like, be quiet, mom. you know, don't need you now.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't need you to survive anymore. I got it. I'll take it from here. We're
yeah.
good.
And being able to create true partnerships really requires being able to have dealt and get up to date with that trauma and identify it and process it, like you said.
Otherwise, you may have two people who are traumatized, who are working at cross purposes all the time, longing to be loved, longing to have true partnership, and not knowing how. So that's a big deal. Like the couple I'm working with, they have two small children. once they realize that, like, oh my goodness, I'm the worst of my mother, worst of his mother. Now we're working from those scripts. We don't have to. Oh, we could do something entirely different. And how that starts, actually, and what I said to them, Laura, because people might be interested in this, is fess up in the moment.
Mm.
Just as soon as you realize it, say, do you know, I'm afraid you're going to be like my dad. I'm sorry. Let me rethink that. Or he can say, oh, I was so concerned that I wouldn't be able to live up to the expectation like my mom. And you do. And let me reprogram that. And so they could talk about it. And that created more emotional intimacy in their relationship, which is exactly where we want to go.
Yeah, so it could be kind of a gift. You can use it as a gift when you're aware of it,
Mhm.
and use it to transform and build that connection, build bridges
Mhm.
through awareness and dealing with trauma, and
Yeah.
bring somebody in and try out things that were scary before and find out that they're not scary. They're actually healing and connecting, to be that vulnerable with somebody and to not have them reject you, right?
Yes, and we have given you, like, a ton of ideas today, I realize that, and it may be, too much to digest, but if that's not the case, or even if that is the case, just think about this idea. Who's talking in my head? Right? Like, who am I actually having a conversation with when I'm dancing for two? Am I negotiating with a parent who's in my past life? Or am I actually negotiating with the situation, the present situation? And usually you'll find that you're behaving from the past. You haven't even seen your partner as a person who might be willing to be entirely different than that person who's occupying your thoughts from the past. And so you just get this freeing up of energy. And yeah, it's not quick. I don't mean to make it sound simple in any way. It takes time and practice and awareness, but so worth it. You are so worth doing that so that you can have full bandwidth today without any of it being taken up by the past.
And having those true partnerships. I know you have a community that is supportive, as a good place to start for people. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Come on over safely off any social media to my emerging empowered community. No matter where you are on this journey, come over. Lots of people to talk to, great opportunities. And as a part of your membership, you get to Ask Me Anything group calls with me a month. So, it's a great thing to do. You get lots of perks. Come on over. You go to joinintoday.com. Really simple. Joinintoday.com.
Yes. So we'll see you over there. This was a very fulfilling conversation about trauma and how it affects current relationships, and how to start getting out of that and becoming aware and recognizing those voices in your head and the perfection paralysis it causes, and the separation it really causes in relationship when your trauma could be used to bring you together. And that's my takeaway from today.
Good. And notice deeply inside you, is there a little niggling fear of rejection that's causing you not to enter in conversations or try something new or do something? And if that's the case, let's heal that, because that is a life stopper.
Yeah. All right. Well, here's to breathing in and becoming more aware. And we'll be back next time for
Yes.
another Transform Your Relationships. Thanks, Roberta.
Thanks, Laura.